It is the wonderful time of the year where we get to look back on the 2024 season and react to all the races, all the seasons of the drivers, and my favorite of all, my predictions from the start of the year. First of all, I want to apologize in advance. My voice is a little bit more raspy, and I've got a bit of a Rudolph nose at the moment because I've been out sick the last couple days, so not getting this content out as quickly as I would have wanted at the end of the season, but it happens. So, my predictions from this year. I do recall I made a couple big swings with them, and I remember a little bit kind of the top order of my predictions, but the bottom order I've completely forgotten about. So I'm sure there's going to be a few things that are wildly out of order. So I'm very interested to react to these. I haven't watched them since I made them. So let's see how this goes.
I am going to start off with my drivers predictions.
Starting off with drivers.
And this is my first big swing. Not because of the driver that I have in this position, but because this position that I am guessing is P21. Because I think that someone's going to get replaced mid-season. So, in P21, I have Kevin Magnussen.
Okay, so my big swing ended up being not a big enough swing because we didn't have just one reserve driver take over in 2024. We had 4, which is crazy because even having one in a season is pretty rare. Now, the fact that P21 I put Magnussen, not great. Magnussen was actually 15th because the Haas was much better than expected. So already off to a roaring start, being 6 places off on him. Let's keep going here.
The biggest reason for this is I just think that the Haas is probably going to be the weakest car. Without Gunther there, I think they're going to be lacking a direction, and I also just don't have faith that they will ever be able to figure out why their tires constantly degrade during races. In P20, I have Zhou Guanyu.
Wow, I was actually right on the mark with Joe. And this wouldn't have happened without those Qatar points, so maybe there was a reason I was cheering for him so hard, but let's see what I have to say about Joe.
The Stake F1 cars, I don't have any faith that they have managed to figure anything out.
Yep.
I think they're all just preparing for the Audi years.
Pretty much.
And I think this is just going to be a very mediocre team for the next 2 years.
Yeah, so my calls on Stake were quite accurate. I think the late season surge was a little bit unexpected from them, so maybe they'll be able to carry some of that momentum into 2025, but yeah, definitely a pretty poor season from the team.
In P19, I have Nico Hülkenberg. I think similarly to last year, he's going to qualify quite well on occasion, but just like K-Mag, I think the tire wear is going to kill that car, and he's just not going to get very many points.
P19, I had Hülkenberg, which, oh boy, that's a solid 8 off of where he was in P11, which is pretty accurate finishing position for him, given that he had, I think, at least 7 P11s over the course of the whole year. So, yeah, I just severely underestimated Haas. I think a lot of people underestimated them. I remember Ayo Komatsu saying that he expected Haas to be last going into testing, and I made these predictions before testing, so kind of took him at his word, and then Haas managed to actually figure out their tire issues in testing, and it meant that they were actually a really good team, and probably, I would honestly say, the 5th best team for most of the year. I think the issue is that they never were able to have a really big result. I think Aston Martin at the start of the year was able to have a couple really big results, and then obviously Alpine at the end of the year were able to have a couple big results, and so that allowed them to finish ahead of Haas. But I think Haas was kind of the most consistently that 5th best team, where they were getting like the lower level of the points at most races this year, and yeah, they just did unbelievably well, and I'm very impressed by them this year. I think they've definitely exceeded my expectations.
In P18, I actually have Logan Sargent. I think that the Williams car will be kind of at a similar level as it was to 2023. And I think with the amount of experience he was able to get in his first year, I do think that he'll be better prepared for the pressures of F1 and be able to be closer to Albon.
Oh boy. Okay. One sec. We'll have one brief interruption by my baby boy, Jasper, who's very upset that I've locked him in my room with me. And he's very upset that his mother, my roommate, is not home yet, so he's all alone. No chicky treats. Just staring into the abyss. I love him so much. Okay, I'm gonna let him out and then. Okay, where were we? Logan Sargent. I think I had more faith in him that, or at least more faith in the Williams car, that it would be better this year. And I don't know if it was any better or worse than 2023. I think it was just that they ran into such bad luck and just the constant crashes and the start of the year just really set them back. And then they were just never able to get kind of their footing again. And then a lot of teams passed them. Yeah, I kind of feel bad for the guy, but I think he just wasn't quite cut out for F1, which can happen. But yeah, given that he finished, he finished 23rd because Doohan finished 24th. So I was only 5 off. It could have been worse. Let's continue.
I think his biggest issue in 2023 was that he was never able to put a full weekend together. And I think he was just making mistakes because he was putting too much pressure on himself. But now that he's been given this second season, I think he'll have calmed down a little bit. And if he can get off to a better start, I think he'll have more confidence and be able to get some points finishes.
Okay. I honestly, this might have been true. I think the issue was the whole thing that happened in Australia, where the Williams team just showed how little faith they had in him when they gave his car to Alex to race that weekend. And I think that destroyed any chance of Logan finding his confidence in that car.
In P17, I have Valtteri Bottas. For me, I think...
Oh my god, how would this end up being worse than...
But Valtteri still manages to have a couple decent results
it's the same, because Bottas is
with
22nd.
A car like that. I think he'll probably get the most points of the season at Bahrain, because that always seems to be a track that he's good at and able to get
Joe was good at it this year.
It might be one of the only times in 2024 that Valtteri gets any points, so... but it might be enough to keep him ahead of the bottom feeders.
Yeah, so poor Bottas just... Whenever the car was good enough for points, he got into bad luck, and or didn't perform, and when he was performing well, the car wasn't there. Yeah, just a really disappointing season for Bottas. There's not really much else to say about that.
In P16, I have Alex Albon. I think
I was right on with him.
He's going to do a little bit worse this coming year than he did in 2023, mainly because I think a lot more teams are going to figure things out and get ahead of Williams, and so I think there will be less opportunities for them to get points. And I also think that teams are going to have caught on to Williams' strategy of going long on the tires in order to keep the train of cars behind them. And so I don't think that will work as well as it did in 2023.
Okay.
Now, in P15, this is what I hinted at earlier, and I have Liam Lawson.
Yeah, I was right on with Albon, and so I'm pretty happy with that prediction. Lawson, I am 6 off. In some ways, it was almost bad that I made the prediction that he would come in, because it means that I have an extra person on my grid to lose me points for being bad at predicting. Because I'm not losing any points for not having predicted Ollie or Doohan or Colapinto being on there, but oh well. I won't be doing that in the future, even though I think this is going to be a much more common occurrence.
This is a bit of a swing because it could not happen, and then my predictions will be totally ruined, but if it does land, I'm gonna look like a genius. So
in some respects, I kind of did look like a genius because I predicted this, but it wasn't really the reason. I thought that Daniel was gonna get Checo seed. which also almost happened, but yeah, wasn't predicting Lawson replacing Ricardo. And only 6 races to go. I was expecting this to be more like mid-season, which is why I have Lawson a little bit higher up there. But yeah, I took a swing. It was partially right. The RB just wasn't good enough for points to get him up to 15th by that part of the season. So yeah, it happens.
In P14, I have Esteban Ocon.
Nailed that one too!
I do not have faith in that Alpine team. They have been going nowhere for years. And I think Esteban is going to be too focused on beating Gasly to really optimize the points that he can get in that car.
Oh, man. Yeah, he certainly was kind of focusing too much on Gasly, at least at the start of the year. I think that's what ended up in his falling out with Alpine, with the whole Monaco blow up. The funny thing is, Ocon would not have finished anywhere near here without that miraculous result in Brazil, because he got 18 out of his 23 points from that one race. So, in my predictions wise, that was a great result for me. So, thank you for rain in Brazil.
P13, I have Lance Stroll. I think that the Aston Martin
I got that right too. Oh my god, I'm
strong
nailing
as
it this year.
in 2023.
At least this point of the...
And for this reason, it's going to be a lot tougher for him to get points. And especially since Lance struggles in qualifying, it's tough for him to make up enough positions in the race to get into the points.
Yep, I was pretty spot on with Stroll. And a very interesting fact is that Lance did not get a single point after the summer break. So 10 straight races, no points for Stroll. So all of those points that he got were in the first half of the season. So, yep, that just shows you how poor of a season he had. And yeah, I nailed him as well with P13. So, yep, let's keep going here.
In P12, I have Pierre Gasly.
Ooh,
the biggest reason I have him ahead of Ocon is I think he is the stronger qualifier. And so I think he will be able to hang on enough times to get more points than Esteban. And I also think that Pierre seems content with being in Alpine, and I think will be much more team focused as opposed to Esteban, who can sometimes be a little bit more selfish than other drivers on the grid.
Yeah, I think that was pretty spot on for Gasly. Fortunately, I was 2 spots off with him, but yeah, he had a fantastic end to the season. And Alpine in general, just the last quarter of the year basically shot up from P9 to P6, which is incredible by them. So yeah, halfway through the season I was like, oh, my LP predictions aren't looking that great, but they ended up being pretty close to spot on, so I'm pretty happy about that.
In P11 I have Yuki Tsunoda.
Oh, I was one off for Yuki.
I think that the Racing Bull.
See, the funny thing is, when I made this, I was calling them Racing Bulls because they hadn't actually announced what the name was yet. And the rumor out there was the Racing Bulls. But then they came out with like, oh, it's Visa Cash App RB. And though I avoided saying that all year and called them RB. But then now we circled all the way back to the point where there actually are called Racing Bulls. And so now this video is right. So funny how that works sometimes. Anyways, play.
Will be a much better car than it was in 2023, and so I have faith that Yuki will be able to get a lot out of that car and finish in the points a lot more often than he did in 2023.
Yeah, I think going into 2024, I think a lot of us were kind of riding the hype that, oh, RB's gonna go back to using a lot of Red Bull's parts and they're gonna be able to make the car a lot better and all this stuff. And at the start of the season, they were definitely better, but yeah, their strategy department completely let the team down. They did not develop the car very well, and so yeah, it was just kind of a mess. I think this is about where Yuki was going to finish, and I was one off on him, so pretty happy with that one too.
Now this this will either go over very, very well, or it could be the end of my predictions. But in P10, I have Sergio Perez.
I remember when I made this prediction, a lot of people in the comments were like, what the hell are you on, Robin? This guy finished P2 in the championship. Red Bull had been absolutely dominant for all of 2023, and you've dropped him 8 positions from where he finished. And the funny thing is, the reason why I had them this low is because I thought that Daniel was going to replace him midway, and so he would have this bulk of points from the first half of the season, and then he would just like slowly drop down the order because people would start passing him once Daniel replaced him. But it turned out the Paris was so bad that he got the whole season and finished P8, which is only 2 spots off of where I put him. So it was actually a pretty decent prediction. Yeah, let's see what I have to say about it from back then, but I'm pretty happy with the swing I took there, apart from the other half of this whole thing we'll see in a second here. It was not great.
I don't have faith that he's going to stay in that seat all year, mainly because I think other teams are going to be closer to Red Bull this year.
Yep.
And with his poor qualifying, it's going to be a lot tougher for him to be close to Max.
Yep.
He's going to have a lot more positions to make up in the race if he's constantly being knocked out in Q2.
Yep,
so I think
Q1.
Red Bull will realize that their Constructors Championship is at risk, and they will have to
yeah, you would think that would be the
replace
logical
Checo
choice to
for
make.
Daniel. In P9, I have Fernando Alonso.
So this ended up being spot on as well. Yeah, I think Alonso got very lucky in the fact that Aston Martin was quite good at the start of the year, because I think that we can see from the fact that Lance didn't get a single point in the second half of the year just how much that car tailed off. And so I think if that Aston Martin hadn't been good at the start, like, yeah, they would have finished below Haas and below Alpine, I think. But yeah, they just got lucky with the fact that I think a lot of cars took a little bit of time to kind of get going at the start of the year. But yeah, I think best of the rest is always a good plot to put Alonso, because he wasn't going to be any better than the top 8. And so, yeah, and he's just a better driver than everyone else on the grid. So
just see Aston Martin dropping back.
Yep.
I didn't see enough from them developing that car in 2023 for me to have him any higher than this. In P8, I have George Russell. Yes, this might be a bit of a shock, but I don't have as much faith in Mercedes as everyone else seems to. I think George really struggled in 2023, and I'm just worried that he is going to butt heads with Lewis a bit too much and distract himself from driving well. And so I think he's going to finish P8.
He did butt heads at points with Hamilton, but definitely not as much as in 2023. I think because Lewis struggled so much in qualifying, it meant that they weren't next to each other on track as much as you would think they would be, even though by the end of the race they'd usually finish right next to each other. But it was always like George just kind of maintaining his qualifying position, and then Hamilton having to kind of fight his way back up, and then there was enough of a time difference that they were never really battling that much on track. I can't even remember very many races this year where they actually had a battle. Maybe Spain, but I'm almost thinking that was 2023. Where they were kind of having a bit of a spat over the radio. I had more faith in Lewis and his race pace, and I think I underestimated how much Mercedes would favor Russell this year and how much that affected Lewis's ability to qualify well.
In P7, I have Daniel Ricciardo. Yeah, this is all dependent on him getting Checo's seat in the Red Bull. But I think it is definitely possible.
It nearly happened.
And I think it is especially possible if that Racing Bulls car is good.
It was not.
And even if it is good, he might do well enough to finish quite high up in the standings. I don't think he would get to P7 in a Racing Bull, but I think if he has a portion of the year in that Red Bull, I think he should be able to gain quite a few positions.
Oh, Robin. Oh. And like, after Belgium, this looked like a possibility. Like, there were rumors out there that Daniel was getting the seat. There were photos of him drinking his wine with Max on his plane back to Monaco, and it looked like they were all super happy, and it looked like this was gonna happen. And then if it weren't for Checo and whatever monetary hold he has over Red Bull, this might have actually happened. Just very disappointed I think this was also me kind of trying to hold on to the last dregs of Daniel's F1 career. And it sounds like Daniel is officially done now. So, yeah, I don't think we'll see him back in F1. But this was a wild swing, and it was definitely my worst prediction because I think Daniel finished in P17, which is 10 spots off of where I had him. So, yeah, that's probably going to be the swing that cost me doing well this year compared to my last 2 years. But yeah, we'll take the L. At least I tried to do something a little bit different with my predictions.
In P6, I have Carlos Sainz.
One off on Sainz.
I think that with the Ferrari being developed more in Charles's direction, it's going to be tough for Carlos to keep up with him.
I don't know if car development really went that much the way of Charles. I think the car development just went, apart from that small stretch in the middle of the season, it just went more in a direction that was easier for both of them to handle. Yeah, I think Sainz definitely did struggle a little bit compared to Charles in terms of qualifying. But yeah, he finished about where I had him. So he finished P5 and I had him P6. So
in P5, I have Oscar
all right,
Piastri.
That's one off as well.
I think that he has proven himself to be a very strong driver, and I have faith that that McLaren car is going to be very good in 2024. But I just think that his issues with tire management are still going to linger. And so it's going to be tough for him to break into a higher position than this. In P4, I have Lewis Hamilton. Honestly, I just can't see Lewis finishing much lower than this.
You would think.
He's just way too consistent of a driver. And even if the Mercedes isn't that great, I still have faith that he'll be able to get as much as he can out of it.
Yeah, so I'm 3 spots off Hamilton, who finished P7, which I think I read somewhere is the lowest he's finished maybe since one of his McLaren years? Not too sure what the stat is there, but definitely the lowest he's ever finished in a Mercedes. I just had a little bit more faith in Lewis than what ended up happening this year. Yeah, it's kind of still shocking to see him down in 7th.
In P3, I have Charles Leclerc.
All right, I was straight on with that one.
I think that once again, the Ferrari will prove to be a decent car at some tracks that will maybe be able to compete with Red Bull. But once again, I think Ferrari shenanigans, reliability, and the once-a-year bottle job that Charles tends to have, I think that will mean that he will finish a little bit lower than the top.
So shockingly, I don't really know if I would say that Ferrari made any mistakes, like at least egregious mistakes, strategy-wise, reliability-wise, or even, I don't think Charles really had one bottle job this year. I think maybe the one exception is like the fact that I think at Canada, I think he almost got hit with all 3 in that one, because it was a reliability issue with his engine. It was him making bad strategy calls to go on to slicks in the wet. And then, just kind of that all culminated in a kind of a bottle job. So that was kind of the one exception. But that was also kind of when the car decided to stop working. I think Charles had a fantastically consistent year, apart from, that like 4 race stretch in the middle of the season where the Ferrari just went the complete wrong direction development wise. I think they did a fantastic job, and Charles could have finished ahead of Lando if that stretch in the middle hadn't happened.
In P2, I have Lando Norris. I think
spot on with that one too.
He did just about everything except for win a race in 2023.
Yeah.
And if that McLaren car is as good as McLaren are hinting that it will be, I think he will be able to do a lot of good things with it. And so I think he will be Max's stiffest competition for 2024. Because in P1, I once again have Max Verstappen winning the championship.
Spot on with that one as well.
I am hoping and praying and pleading to the F1 gods that it is at least more of a competition in 2024. It
was a little bit.
But at this moment, I just think that Max and Red Bull are too powerful of a combination to be beaten. I think it will be closer, but I do think that he will still come out on top.
So, that was spot on as well. So, I think it seems to happen, at least the 3 years that I've been doing this, where I think I'm pretty good at nailing kind of the top part of the standings. Like I'm only like 1, maybe 2 spots off max for some of those, or I just like get a couple people swapped or kind of 3 people in the wrong order. So I'm pretty happy that I got the top 3 spot on. But yeah, the mid to end part is just always just a complete crapshoot, because I think honestly like the number one thing for those bottom positions is like someone managing to have a shock incredible weekend, because we saw how much of a difference that made on the Alpine results. And I think you just never know what team is going to get a result like that. And that can sometimes have a huge impact on how people finish. So yeah, I somehow managed to get the Alpines actually all right, but I thought it was going to be because the Alpine was actually going to be like a semi-okay car and not the fact that they were going to be terrible all year and then have one shock result. But that's how it happens. So every year I like to track how my predictions fared compared to other years. And so 2024 was easily my worst year yet in terms of predictions. So I've tallied up the difference between where I had a driver and where they actually finished, and my total this year is 52, which is actually not that far off the previous 2 years, but yeah, still the worst season yet. So I think this year I actually had a lot more drivers like 1 or 2 spots off where I had them, but then I had a bunch that were like at least 5 or 6 off, which is a bit of a problem. So I got to try and minimize those big ones in future years. That will be the key to success. All right, let's continue with my video as we get into the constructors. I might try and breeze through this one a lot faster just because I feel like I've already talked about a lot of the things.
So in P10, I have Haas. I just think that they seem to be going backwards, and nothing about this team really excites me at the moment.
So I was 3 spots off of Haas, who actually finished 7th.
In P9, I have Stake, which is also a team that is just going nowhere. In P8, I have Williams. I see them dropping a position.
It was 1 off as well.
And I think this is more so is pushing to do with the fact that other teams will get stronger rather than them getting any weaker. In P7, I have Alpine.
I was 1 off for them too.
I just have no faith in the French team. I don't see a direction. I don't see any passion there. Any of their really good technical staff has moved on. No one seems to want to stick around. Drivers don't stick around. Management doesn't stick around. Team principals don't stick around. And so there's nothing that gives me faith in that team. Even with the celebrity investment going on, it's just, they constantly are making new plans and then changing the plans 2 years in, when everything in F1 requires a lot of time to get anywhere. And so they're just too impatient and a mess, a dumpster fire, a disaster. Like, ugh, Alpine.
All right. Was not expecting myself to lay into Alpine that hard in this video. I still agree with a lot of it, but I do think that Ollie Oakes is a better team principal than whoever the fuck they had before him. And with Flavio in there, I think I have a little bit more faith they're going to go in a good direction, even if that direction involves cheating.
In P6, I have Aston Martin. The main reason for this is Lance Stroll. I think Alonso will probably get 75% of the points for the team in 2024. And I just lost a bit of faith in them as the year went on because they weren't able to develop the car very well.
Yeah, that was pretty spot on for them. They still do not know how to develop a car. So with Adrian Newey there, that might change. I'm not sure if it'll be for next year, but definitely 2026. I think they're going to put out a fire car that year.
The team I have in P5, on the other hand, which is Racing Bulls, we started to see at the end of 2023 them understanding their car concept. And the fact that they will be using a lot of Red Bull parts in 2024, I have faith that they will improve up the lineup.
Yeah, they were just a dumpster fire. I think the constant driver swaps, the poor strategy, yeah, the poor technical development, like all of it just played into them having a terrible season. And I just had way too much faith in them. Should have known with an old Ferrari guy going in there as TP that they wouldn't be very good.
Now, the team I have in P4, I feel like will be a little bit in no man's land. I think they will be a little bit behind the two teams ahead of them, but a huge gap to Racing Bulls behind them.
Yep.
And that is Mercedes. As I
Spot
said
on with
earlier,
them. I knew this
have
going into the
much
season. I
less
just
faith
saw
in
this so
team
clearly in
than
my mind.
everyone else seems to. The reason why I have them here is that they never seem to figure anything out with their car concept. And even though they are going to be going a different direction in 2024, I think other teams have had so much more learning with their concepts that I think Mercedes are going to be taking a big step back to start the year as they learn their new car and how to set it up. And so I think the fact that they will take a bit to get going, they will lose out on a lot of points that the other teams around them will be able to get, and I don't think they will ever be able to make that up throughout the year. I do think by the end of the year they'll be good,
and they actually
but I
kind of
think
were.
at the start of the year they will be behind a lot of the other teams, and so I think it'll be hard for them to catch that up throughout the year.
Yep, that's exactly pretty much what happened.
In P3, I have Ferrari. You think they're going to be good, and every single year they let you down with bad strategy, driver mistakes, and cars that blow up. It's a risk to have them ahead of Mercedes for sure, because Mercedes operationally is much better.
I don't know about
But
that
I think
anymore.
lately Ferrari has been better at developing the car, and so I have a little bit more faith in them.
So I think they were better operationally this year, and yeah, I think overall they did way better than Mercedes in that end. I think Mercedes made a few more strategy errors this year than Ferrari did.
And then in P2, I have McLaren. I think McLaren are definitely on a huge upswing. And the number one reason why I have them finishing here is out of all of the teams except for Red Bull, they seem to understand their car the best.
They do,
and
but
for that reason,
Red Bull don't.
understand how to develop it throughout the season. And so I think they will be able to do the best in 2024 for this reason. I also think that they will have stronger reliability and less driver errors than Ferrari, which is why they will finish ahead of them.
So I actually remember making my predictions this year, and I remember having to go back and forth so much between McLaren and Ferrari on who I thought was going to finish ahead. I ended up putting them in the right order, but I did not expect Red Bull to be as poor as they were to finish P3. But yeah, it was interesting. Like I was having a really tough time placing them because I think I still thought that McLaren was going to be a bit behind coming into this season and have kind of more of a later season push, but they were pretty on it like after Miami. Which I think was earlier than I was expecting them to start to get good. So I think that was kind of the thing I was struggling with, where I thought Ferrari were going to continue to be pretty good after 2023 being kind of that secondish place team. I guess they were third after Mercedes, but I was expecting McLaren to take a little bit longer. But yeah, it ended up being them two in that order, but up one spot each. So dang. I kind of also had a feeling that maybe Red Bull wouldn't be as strong because of the engine or the financial penalties from the years previous, but I didn't trust my gut and I still kept Red Bull's top one. So darn.
And number one, I'm going to have Red Bull. I think this will be a tighter gap than it was in 2023. I think Max will not be able to win the championship on his own in 2024. But I think their car is just too good for them not to win, even if they have a driver swap partway through the year.
Yeah. Max was good enough to win, but Red Bull as a team were not, because Checo was so bad that it cost them the driver or the constructors. So, yep, that's how that went. And looking at my constructor prediction scores, also my worst year yet. I got 14. points for being off. I think this year I didn't get very many right on. In 2023, I think I literally got the top 6 right, I want to say. It was something crazy like that. And I don't think I'm ever going to do that ever again. So I doubt I'll ever beat that score of 8. But yeah, I think Haas really screwed me in 2024. And because I had them so much lower, it bumped everyone else off by 1. So that kind of doubles the damage in a sense. But yeah, this season was not as good there. So let's get to my hot take predictions.
And my first hot take is the one that was obvious from my driver's standings. And that is that I think that Sergio Perez will be replaced by Daniel Ricciardo halfway through the season, and Liam Lawson will take Daniel's spot at Racing Bulls. I also think that Daniel would have replaced him if Daniel hadn't got injured. I think if Daniel had gotten the entire second half of the season last year to really show his stuff and didn't suffer from the injury, he would have been strong enough to take Checo's seat from him. But I think they'll give Checo a few races into 2024, and if he isn't up to snuff, I think they will replace him.
Yeah. Daniel's just had so much bad luck in that way in his career, like just to get that injury at the worst possible timing, because I do think that was Red Bull's plan when that happened, and I think it just took him a little bit to recover from that. And Liam Lawson really proved how good he is too, and that kind of threw off that plan. Yeah. And then Checo just having all this money, them giving him a new contract, like after 4 races, when we all knew those were the 4 races that Checo was good at, and then he tailed off completely after that, and that happened in 2023 as well. So it's just like all of these things were kind of lining up in my head to make that kind of prediction, but sometimes you just forget how much of a hold money has on people. And I think without money, this would have happened, which is so disappointing. I think the reason he was dropped was probably because after that after the Spa conversation with them deciding not to drop Checo, I think Daniel had probably been told he was going to get Checo's seat, and then they ended up reneging on that. And so at that point, he was like, what's the point of me even driving in this RB? Like, there's no point to this. If I'm not getting that Red Bull, what am I even doing here? And then his results tailed off. And then they were like, okay, let's just replace him with Lawson because there's no point to him being here anymore. Yeah, he's just a victim of circumstance, I think. And like his own fault too, because if he'd performed much better in the first half of the season, I think there wouldn't have been any reason for them to doubt putting him in. But I think he just wasn't quite good enough to warrant being replacing Checo, and for the monetary loss that Red Bull would have had to incur, I think they just decided it wasn't worth it. And so, yeah, it's just super unfortunate.
My second hot take prediction is that I think that Racing Bulls will get a podium in 2024. I think this will likely be Daniel, which will be why that Red Bull decide to swap him and Checo.
He almost did at the sprint race in Miami.
Has equally as much of an opportunity to get a podium, and there are a few tracks that Yuki seems to be very good at.
Yeah, and Yuki could have been in the wet race in Brazil too, so like it wasn't that far off.
He's quite good, and so I think Yuki will be able to do something special somewhere. Or Daniel will do it in Mexico.
And he didn't race in Mexico.
Sergio.
Dang.
Or maybe early on at Monaco, because if Daniel is comfortable with that car, I could see him putting on a glorious show at Monaco, because he's proven
he hasn't been
to
good
be
in Monaco since
quick
2018. What are you talking about?
And then my third hot take is that I think both McLaren drivers will get a Grand Prix win.
Lando got 4, Oscar got 2, I think. All right, so that's the end of that. Yeah. I think in certain ways I didn't take big enough swings, and in other ways I took way too big of a swing. A lot of things I predicted actually were very close to happening, but didn't quite. So yeah, a bit of a bummer that some of these predictions didn't quite land, but that's usually how predictions go. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this one. Let me know what your wildest prediction was at the start of the 2024 season, and if it came true. Take care for the holidays. Doodles.